Hey everyone, welcome to the VAMP webinar. As many of us in the industry know, we've got some big changes really right around the corner. I cannot believe it's almost April here in 2025. Got big changes around the corner. I know as we've been wading through and trying to understand what's coming, it's been really helpful to just, discuss openly with colleagues, with experts about what VAMP is, what changes, what we need to know as merchants, as those of us who support merchants for some of these changes. So today we're going to get into that. Before I get started, just a couple of quick housekeeping things. One, there is a QA function that you should see in your screen. If you have a question at any time, feel free to open that up, ask the question. We'll pull them in as we can. We definitely have time at the end for Q&A, but we may be able to do some Q&A as we get going. Secondly, don't feel the need to jot everything down or do a bunch of screenshots. We are going to send out the screen or the full webinar as a recording to everyone who registered. So you will be able to get that as an email. All right, so I'm Nicole Joss. I am the head of strategy and chief of staff here at Signifyd. I came to Signifyd after 7 years at Worldpay, so have a long history of running product teams and working with product teams and merchants across the globe at Worldpay. Really excited now to be over here at Signifyd. And to help us talk about VAMP, have assembled a couple of really strong experts in the space and a global group as well. So Xavi, who is based in Barcelona, but today is in Berlin, has joined us. He's Senior Manager of Risk Intelligence from Signifyd. Xavi, I'll let you give a quick intro.
Thanks, Nicole, for the intro. I'm Xavi from Signifyd. Thanks all for having me here. Very quickly, in my role, I'm managing a group of Sherlock Holmes, a group of fraud-fighting ninjas, every day putting their fraud hat on and decoding fraud patterns and turning those learnings into strategies. Super excited. There's a lot to unpack when it comes to VAMP, and it's a pleasure to deep dive into that with you all today.
Thanks, Xavi. And then we have Kim, based in Cincinnati, a former colleague of mine, who is on the front lines of disputes working on the acquiring side. Kim, you want to give a quick intro?
Yeah, hello. Hi, everybody. I'm Kimberly. I'm the product manager for merchant disputes here at WorldPay globally. I've been living and breathing disputes for probably about, 13 years now. So it's something I thoroughly enjoy getting into and understanding how we can best assist our customers in this space. So looking forward to talking with you today.
Great. So before we jump into some serious questions and hard-hitting questions, a little bit of maybe a nerdy fun one. We're all we all understand disputes and fraud more intimately than most of the friends we probably associate with on the weekends. But let's talk about your favorite dispute story as a consumer. So as a consumer, Kim, what is a fun or favorite dispute story?
So I don't know if it's fun, but recently around Christmas time, I ordered my son loves monster trucks. So I ordered him monster truck Crocs. I was super excited about it. But they were a European company I ordered from online. And when I ordered online, they had sizes in United States size charts as well as European. So I selected my son's shoe size. I completed the order. A couple weeks later, I got the shoes. And when I pulled them out, they were tiny. I'm like, this is not going to fit my son's foot. So I'm like, okay, they sent me the wrong size. And when I looked at it, it was in a European size. I think it was like a 20 something. So I'm like, okay. I reached out. I'm like, hey, wrong size. I'd love to return these. And they're like, well, what size did you get? And I told them, like, well, no, that was the right size. That's what you ordered. I said, well, no, I ordered this size. And they're like, yes, if you reference our size chart, the size in US correlates to this size in European. And I'm like, oh my goodness, maybe I did make a mistake here. And then I did see their size chart and they were right. I got the right size according to the European on the size chart and the mapping. But when I started doing some Googling, I'm like, okay, the US size does not map to that European size. Every chart I pulled up, it was incorrect. And I'm like, listen, I understand what you're saying, but when I look at any other size chart, it's incorrect. And then they came back and said, well, you should have measured your kid's foot because we also supply inches. And I'm like, what? Sure. But who does that? Who is measuring their kid's foot to be like, you know what, let me make sure you're truly 13 inches or whatever. That's way too long. But so I was like, I'm going to raise a chargeback. I'm going to go down this path. But first, I warned them, and we went back and forth for a while. And so I got lucky. And while this isn't a chargeback necessary story, I had to threaten a chargeback with the merchant in order for them to do what I felt was the right thing. And I initially just wanted an exchange. Give me the right size. Give me the size I want. I'll do some measurement now. And they weren't willing to do that either. So we went back and forth a while, and I did end up getting the funds back minus shipping, which I was comfortable with. But I definitely would have gone down the chargeback path had they not eventually done the right thing, as I felt as a merchant.
Yeah, sounds like you had to be pretty adamant about your stance. And then, I mean, I guess good on them for recognizing that a chargeback could cost them more.
Right. They did
Um,
acknowledge that.
yeah, I'll share my story here in a minute. They didn't do that. And I had to actually pull out the big guns and go with the whole chargeback route. All right, Shavi, what's your dispute story?
Yeah, I have maybe like similar stories to Kim, like where she threatened, where I also threatened with going down, to a chargeback if I would not get my money back. So what happened to me is like I signed up for a sock of the month club.
Okay.
I mean, why not? I was always losing one. So it turned out like after 8 months, I had way more socks than I needed. And as I tried to cancel, they told me like, hey, I actually have committed to a sock journey for at least 12 months. Um, so yeah, I threatened to charge. I argued that my sock drawer is pretty much like a black hole of unwanted fabric at the minute. And after I threatened it to start like with a chargeback, they then kind of started the process of you know um, canceling the subscription. So in the end of the day, happy Pat.
Yeah, so they had good listeners out to know that it would be better for them to go ahead and do what the customer's asking to do. And I think that's part of what we're seeing with VAMP too is the combination of fraud disputes and non-fraud disputes, which are what you guys are talking about. It's not like Kim called and said, I didn't order these shoes. That wasn't me. Or Shavi said, I didn't order the subscription. My story is similar. I ordered a pair of boots. I really wanted like a brown pair of boots. When they showed up, they had a red tint in them. And I thought surely I would just call the company up and say, hey, these are different than what I thought I ordered. The picture was wrong on the website. And they said they're non-returnable. And there was nowhere anywhere that I had found that they weren't returnable. So went back and forth a bit. And then I did just file a chargeback and actually won the chargeback. We would all know that as significantly not as described, right? So it's like basically a SNAD chargeback. And as we're going to get into here in a minute, I think it's important that all three of our experiences, like I said, are in that non-fraud space. And the way you fight those a lot of times is better policies, right? And better website signage, communication to be able to make sure that the sizing charts, the colors, the pictures, the description of a subscription, how you get out, are actually going to come in and start mattering alongside of your fraud disputes. So I think it's both sides. I don't think any of us are abusive. I'm not sure I would put that in the category of abuse. I would have happily gotten a pair of boots that were just more brown. Kim just wanted the right size shoe, and Xavi wanted to stop having to like push his socks into his sock drawer. All right, so let's get into it and let's start talking about what this thing is that's right around the corner. If we want to hit the next slide. So what VAMP is really April 1st. It's the Visa Acquire Monitoring Program, and it's really combining what they already have in place today of the Visa Disputes Monitoring Program and the Visa Fraud Monitoring Program. So VDMP and VFMP. Also, they're going to take a specific look at card testing or enumeration attacks, as this is really heating up across issuer and acquirers globally. So as we peel the onion back a bit more, we can see what the various aspects are on the next slide for the program. So the first thing, as I mentioned, they are really consolidating programs. So rather than having to watch two programs on disputes and frauds, it's consolidating into single thresholds. So that's one. Another one is an accountability shift. Well, it's great to have Kim here because it's not just on the merchant side. The acquirers are going to have a pretty tight threshold to manage to and a shrinking threshold over time. So they've got to watch from a portfolio perspective their thresholds as well. A new fee structure. So rather than like a monthly fee, there's going to be a per chargeback. fee. So we'll get a bit more into that. And it's not just the chargebacks. My understanding is it's not just the chargebacks over the threshold, but once you actually go over the threshold and are in the program, then you're going to get hit for all the chargebacks. As I mentioned, card testing, monitoring, so enumeration attacks, there will be specific thresholds. We need to learn a little bit more about how those will be measured and how the thresholds will be set. But it's important to know, and that's not coming until January of next year, the enumeration attack piece. But it's really, really important to right now start understanding your footprint there, how you're measuring. And like I said, we're going to understand more about how Visa is going to be measuring this. Some late breaking news, actually, within the last couple of weeks on dispute resolution. Initially, our understanding was that RDR, a Visa product, would be able to, if you used RDR, you could lower the fraud threshold, not just the dispute threshold. But what we're now hearing is that RDR can only be used to minimize the dispute threshold. So if you're using RDR, it's actually your fraud are still going to count towards the threshold. So the team will help me unpack that a bit further and talk about what that means. So RDR essentially is not your way out for the fraud piece. And then also this removal of an early warning, or what I like to think about as a yellow card. Previously, there was a bit of a warning to say, hey, you're getting into dangerous territory. You've committed a foul. It's not quite a red card, but you're in that dangerous territory before you actually got to the full program. That's removed, and now there is just that single threshold. So there's going to be a grace period. You'll have a bit of time to get used to it and get used to these new thresholds, but as we get into the full program, that early warning is going away. All right, so we're going to get into it more. So some of the big questions I would be asking are, what are the threshold? What are the exact numbers that are changing? So let's go to the next slide. We've laid this out so that you can see with VDMP and VFMP today, and then going into VAMP, what are the changing thresholds? That's how you can see this laid out with the program, the timeline. Like I said, April 1 is when VAMP rolls out, and there's going to be a certain set of thresholds that hit April 1. And then there's going to be even a more tightening as we get into January of next year. So it's not just we have a heads up on what's coming in April, but also what's around the corner that we're going to be measured by, and the thresholds are going to be shrinking here within the next 12 months, actually only 9 months away. So to help us unpack this further, I'm going to hand it over to the team. Kim, do you want to help us with just what this means from the acquirer side?
Yeah, absolutely. So we know Visa is classifying this as the acquire monitoring program. That's a big change for acquirers. While we had some ratios we had to stay under today, they were high enough that it was not something we ever trended towards, right? It really wasn't something we worried about. And now we have to worry. So we know starting March 31st, everybody in the program that ends, we're done, we're going to start fresh is a cutoff. And then so starting April 1st, Visa is going to start monitoring. They're going to have a nice advisory period of 3 months where they're going to track things. Acquirers and merchants will start getting an idea of where they stand, but these thresholds have reduced significantly, and especially for acquirers. So starting April 1st, if acquirers are greater than or equal to 50 basis points, they will be in the program. And let's go back and talk a little bit about how these thresholds are calculated. So this is the sum, when you think about getting the ratio, it's the sum of card not present fraud identified transactions, so your TC40, the number of non-fraud disputes, so anything in, with the Visa category of 11, 12, or 13, divided by the number of settled card not present transactions only. If you hit the ratio using that calculation, then you are in this program. So if, as an acquirer, if we are above 50 basis points, we will start receiving fines for every merchant in our portfolio that's above 30 basis points. So there's a little caveat there. So we will have to monitor and track towards that. And we will receive a fine of $10 for every TC40 and non-fraud dispute once we hit that ratio. Now, come January 1st, it drops significantly to anything above, equal to or above 30 basis points to the 50 basis points will be above standard, and we will receive a $5 fine for those. And if we get above 50, it'll still remain at the 10. And again, the same tracking for merchants. If we are within the 30 to 50, any merchant within our portfolio who's above 30 will be what we will be assessed for. So big difference, something acquirers are definitely going to have to monitor too and stay ahead of, especially since, as Nicole stated, this yellow card piece is going away, right? We're not going to get an early warning. We need to be prepared and tracking well ahead of time so we can give these yellow cards to our merchants who are tracking to ensure everybody's volume stays below these thresholds.
Yeah, and I would assume on the merchant side, the acquirer is going to be trying to tighten the thresholds, right? So I'm probably going to be having more conversations if I'm a merchant with the acquirer, as I'm part of their portfolio, right? And you guys are managing that portfolio.
Yeah.
Xavi, take us through on the merchant side what's changing across these different thresholds.
Yeah, absolutely. So Kim already covered the ratio calculation. I also want to call out, like, we're going away from authorized transactions, now looking into settled transactions in that calculation. In my opinion, it's an important call out because there is a difference there going from authorized transactions to now looking into settled transactions. So using authorized transactions currently as the denominator may overstate like a merchant's effective transaction volume, since it includes transactions that have never reached a settlement. Now with VAMP, settled transactions, on the other hand, they do provide a more accurate and final view of completed sales and the real exposure to chargebacks or fraud. On the flip side, however, tracking settled transactions can cause delayed insights, especially from a fraud point of view. It's an important call out. Like, so settled transactions, they only capture finalized sales, which introduces a delay in detecting emergent fraud trends or changes in risk patterns. We will talk later about like how, for example, pre-auth integration can help solve for this. And yes, already mentioned earlier, like there is an inclusion of non-fraud disputes in the monitoring program. So this means that, for example, as called out, like your INR, your item not received, or your SNAT, significantly not as described, disputes are included in the calculation and thresholds. So yeah, looking at this table in front of us, which I like as it gives a pretty clear overview of the changes. So today in the dispute and the fraud monitoring program, the excessive threshold is 180 basis points. With VAMP, effective April 1st, excessive thresholds, they move to 150 basis points. And effective January 26, the excessive thresholds will move down to 90 basis points. Again, this is for fraud and non-fraud disputes. Yeah, and in other words, it will be sliced in half. Yeah, also mentioned as well, but I will cover it too. The early warning and the standard threshold will go away. You had a 65 basis points for the early warning and a 90 basis points for the standard. And with the new VAMP, there will be only an excessive threshold for merchants, not an early warning or standard threshold anymore. In my opinion, if I may, with this change, merchants, you might lose out the opportunity to proactively address and course correct rising fraud or dispute rates before reaching the excessive thresholds, which with this safety net gone means merchants might suddenly face penalties without a prior warning. And the other final big change that I want to call out is the elimination of the minimum dollar value. For example, for the Visa fraud monitoring program, the 180 bips excessive threshold, it was not only 180 bips, it was 180 bips plus a 250,000 in fraud volume. So that dollar value requirement will be eliminated. That means that small value fraudulent transactions, which were previously excluded, will now count towards a merchant's fraud ratio.
I think that's a good call out, Xavi. I'd like to add, though, they are having a minimum number of combined fraud and non-fraud disputes at 1,000. So if you're staying under that number, you will not hit the program, even if you are at your basis points. If you stay below that at a monthly level, you can avoid it. And another little caveat here for merchants as well is that if you're at 150 basis points, but your acquirer is above 30, you'll be actually tracked in the acquirer program and not the merchant program, as they're mutually exclusive. So you'd have to be at 150 basis points and you're acquired less than 30 basis points as well to hit the merchant specific program.
Got it. We have a couple questions here. first of all, a question around the measurement. Is it based on mid, like the actual mid, or at the customer level?
So I'll take part of this, but the acquire piece is at the bin. So we'll be monitored at the bin, and then from there, if the bin is identified, we'll be monitored at the mid. So every mid above 30 basis points will be part of that fee structure. And then Xavi, if you want to take the merchant piece.
I think the VAMP is measured on the merchant ID level as well for the merchant level. Yeah, it's on the mid level.
Got it. So it's on the mid level, but then at the bin level. So I could have a range of bins that are below threshold, but a couple of problematic bins that are, those would individually be above 150, then I'm actually going to be in the program.
Yeah.
For those bins.
For an
Okay.
acquire. For an acquire.
Oh, just at the
Yes.
acquire level. Okay. As a merchant,
At
I only
the-
have to worry about my mid.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying. Okay. So the acquire, you're going to be worried about it at the bin level. From a
Yes.
merchant perspective, I have to worry it across my mid. If I have multiple mids, I have to worry about it for each of the mids.
Yes.
Okay, great question. And then the other one we have is how would a merchant know what their current BIPs are? Is there someone, are they measuring it? Can they work with their acquirer? Are you guys measuring it and sending it to them? How would they know?
Yeah, so really they would be a little bit dependent on the acquire here, especially if they don't receive TC40 reporting today, which not all acquirers do share that down to their individual merchants. So I'd encourage you to work with your acquirer. You may be very aware of your fraud rate. So if you're, Visa shared the calculation here. Happy to share it after this call, what we discussed earlier about how they're calculating the ratios. But if you have confirmed TC40, and then you add up all your non-fraud disputes, look at your 11, 12, 13s for Visa, and then divided by your card not present transactions, settled card not present transactions, you can start getting to your ratio. But I think that the difficult one may be you might be guessing a little bit at the confirmed fraud, and I'd encourage you to work with your acquirer.
Yeah, you can definitely, before Signifyd, I was managing fraud at the merchant level as well. You can, apart from that, you can definitely also, make sure that you track it from your end and calculate that as well, which can, help to avoid surprises as well. So absolutely a recommendation to make sure that, yeah, on a daily basis, you check your current rates with your internal data.
Yeah. I would also assume, Xavi, that if they're working with Signifyd today, that's something that we can help them calculate as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. For the merchants that we work with today, we do that. Yeah.
Yeah. If you don't work with us, give us a shout and we could also, we're happy to help you with that as well. All right. I guess, so what's the penalty box look like? What are do we have a sense of the fees? Is there a grace period, or like April 2nd, am I getting a bill?
So they are offering a grace period. So we know that they're going to have this advisory period until the end of June. And then July, they will start enforcement. If come July, you are identified in the program, you have a 90-day grace period to correct. So you have 90 days to get your volume below those thresholds. If you get below those thresholds within 90 days, you will not receive a fine. However, if you don't, you will receive those fines as mentioned, which is for merchants is $10 per TC40 and non-fraud dispute, not just above the thresholds, all of them. And this grace period is nice because if you stay out, let's say you get out of the program, you get those 90 days, you get this grace period every rolling 12 months for as long as you're out of the program. For your first notification in a rolling 12-month period, you get this 90-day grace. So while they're not doing early warning necessarily, they are giving a little bit of a grace for merchants for first identified and not continuous offenders of the program.
Yeah, that's super helpful to know. All right. I've got lots more questions for you guys. So I guess, so we know VAMP consolidates fraud and dispute monitoring. How do you think this will impact merchants' day-to-day operations? So what's changing? What should change for them if it hasn't already, like today? Xavi, you want to take that to start?
All right, let's go. So yeah, also there's a lot to okay, but I'm gonna start. So I think with the rollout of VAMP, Visa's fundamentally changing, right? Like how merchants are managing fraud and disputes by consolidating the fraud and the non-fraud into a single framework. So previously merchants focused primarily on fraud chargebacks, but now under VAMP, they must now track all of the disputes whether due to fraud, customer dissatisfaction, operational issues, because again, they all count towards the program. So this shift makes proactive dispute prevention, in my opinion, just as important as fraud prevention. So merchants, for example, who used to rely on SCA and fraud tools alone, now also need a stronger post-transaction strategies. Think here about like a better customer service or clearer refund policies or chargeback management processes or AI-driven dispute analysis. So I think that's one. The other piece is that now with VAMP, we have stricter thresholds, meaning merchants need to monitor fraud and disputes more closer than ever before. And you know, that pressure to stay compliant could also lead to stricter fraud controls. But tightening the fences too much risks also blocking your good customers and increasing false positives. So, you know, in the end of the day, that could ultimately harm your revenue. So merchants, they will have to find a balance between security and approval rates. Um, Working with machine learning day in, day out, I can definitely say that AI and machine learning is a super big help here to differentiate between legitimate transactions and the risky ones and um, adapt dynamically to evolving threats while you minimize your friction on your good users. And the last point that I would like to add here is, you know, as mentioned, I'm deep into the you know, the evolving fraud trends as I'm managing a fraud team. And I would like to call out, like at the same time from our side, we do see that fraud is evolving at scale. We see lots of automated fraud attacks, account takeovers, refund abuse, return abuse. It continues to grow rapidly. And yeah, with VAMP's lower tolerance for disputes, one major fraud event or coordinated attack could be enough to, you know, to push you as a merchant into excessive thresholds overnight. So call out that you need to have like quick fraud detection, make sure that you invest in that before it's too late and suffering the penalty. So yeah, wanted to call that out, but I think it's important to keep in mind.
Yeah, no, thanks, Shavi. Lots to consider. Be proactive, know where you're at, call in your partners, right? Potentially, if you don't have the right partner, start making sure you are talking to those who might be better partners. Kim, what else? Like what on the operations side is going to change for them?
Yeah, so I think what I want to call out here is that the first thing you need to do, and Javi mentioned this and Nicole mentioned this, is understand your current ratios. Perhaps this has no impact on your day-to-day because you're trending well below those and it's nothing you need to worry about. However, on the flip side of that, if you do find that you're getting close to those 150 basis points and later 90 basis points, we need to be very aware of that. There may be some changes you're going to have to make operationally to ensure that you don't get tracked within this program. And I think, you know, understanding why you're receiving disputes, why you have fraud, and then course correcting is key here. So first and foremost, check your ratios, see where you stand to try to understand, do you need to do anything at all? And if so, where's your problem? Is it disputes? Is it fraud? Is it both? And then to start addressing those.
Yep. We've gotten some really good questions in from the audience that I want to pause and ask here. So I mentioned earlier we had card enumeration was also part of this, that there will be a targeted beyond this, right? That there's going to be a threshold for card enumeration. My understanding is that doesn't take effect until January of 2026, and they're still working out the details there. Can you guys elaborate on that one?
Yeah, so it seems right now, card enumeration calculations is a little bit of Visa's special sauce, right? They're not exactly sharing how they're doing those calculations. So we as acquirers are still trying to dig into that and understand how we can stay ahead of it for our merchants and ensure our calculations for enumeration and how it's identified and matches that what Visa's doing. We have asked those questions, you know, how are you calculating this? How can we duplicate? We haven't received any solid answers. So still working towards that and understanding a little bit more on the enumeration side as far as this program. So I know not an excellent answer right now. Hopefully we'll have more for you in the coming month.
And I can chime in on that as well, because even though that we don't know yet, like how Visa is going to calculate this enumeration attack, the question also calls out like, how can you prepare, right? Like, so even though that you don't know fully, you know, yet like how it's calculated, you can definitely take that already into consideration from a preparation perspective. So, um, very quickly, like in terms of, I think maybe for the audience as well that maybe don't know what enumeration attacks are, very quickly, those are scalable automated threats where fraudsters systematically test cards. They test cards, they test card numbers, they test expiration dates, they test CVVs, and even 3DS authentication flows to really validate these combinations. Why is it card testing important for fraudsters? That's basically see it kind of like as a data quality assessment type of thing to see, which cards they then can either use for their fraud attacks or resell on the dark web. For example, that's something that we kind of see day in, day out. My recommendation, since like these will have separated thresholds as well, try to use with your solution provider, like with Signifyd or from your end, like how you can monitor this activity. So meaning from my side, like monitor your card testing activity very closely. And how can you do that? Well, look for the card testing signals. And you might ask like, okay, what are those card testing signals? And I can give a few away. So the first one is see where you have like multiple transactions coming from a single IP address or device. Many transaction attempts originating from the same address or device within a short time. That can hint towards card testing attack. The other one is important is your monitor rapid fire small transactions. So see where like your low value, sometimes between like a cent and $1. That's in a lot of cases what we see. Those transactions to test card validity. And why are they picking low amounts? Well, first of all, it's because has it has a bigger chance to then go under the radar without triggering fraud detection or being seen on the cardholder's bank statement. Um, I think I can give two more away. The other thing is bin anomalies. Transactions primarily target to specific bin ranges. As fraudsters, they usually test entire stolen bin batches. And the last one that you can also apply is see if there is a anomaly in your payment gateway or acquirer rejections. Is there a spike there? Do you see suddenly an increase in declined transactions like do not honor or invalid CVV or incorrect expiry date? So these are all ideas and things that you can implement from your point of view to make sure that your card testing activity is monitored very closely and not be surprised that you exceed your enumeration ratio.
Yeah. Yeah, if it's something you're not like tagging and monitoring today, I would be asking your fraud partners. I would assume, Shavi, this is that we tag this, and I mean, obviously we have machine learning in place that can help prevent it, but we're also tagging it uniquely, and so I think that's part of the question, right? To be asking fraud teams or be answering if you are the fraud team, right?
Yeah.
Is can I tell that this comes from an enumeration attack?
Yeah.
Another question is just the scope. So we know it starts April 1st. There's a grace period, but is it global? Or are they rolling it out country by country? What's the regional impact?
This is a global program. Some regions have some some different thresholds, slightly different fee structures. I mean, mostly what I've been quoting today is a very much a North American based fee structure and ratios. But this is a global program, so I'd encourage you if you're, and maybe in a LATAM space, Ramia, see if there's any nuances, because I have noticed a few as I'm reading through these rules that maybe slightly impact you with their differences.
Yep. Okay. So as we're talking about these stricter thresholds and potential penalties, we've talked about operate like day to day. What can we be doing? What else proactive? What can I start doing, and what should they be doing proactively to be prepared? Kim, do you want to start with that one?
Sure, I can start with that. And I think this is going to be a trend for me. You're going to keep hearing me hammer this home, but disputes here, right? All of these disputes that count in this program are non-fraud. So start understanding your dispute volume. many of them, as Nicole, Javi, and I referenced, they begin with a misunderstanding, right? So how can you combat this, right? Is this with maybe it's as simple as transparent billing descriptors, real-time transaction notifications, a user-friendly refund process? I mean, we're all very used to the Amazon today, right? It makes it super easy to return something, and consumers now expect that out of every merchant. So start looking at your policies. How can they be adjusted to kind of reflect what consumer expectations are today? Um, so that's a big thing I would advise you as a merchant. Look at your chargeback trends. What are you trending towards, and what are ideas you might have outside of your typical fraud process that you can do to address those to ensure that you reduce your non-fraud chargeback volume?
Shavi, anything to add there?
Yeah, around, oh, sorry. Yeah, I think like what you can do about, I think again, like to prepare for that, like for me, like VAMP is not just like a policy update. It's really kind of a wake up call, how you should like rethink about like fraud, disputes, and how you handle risks, and really adapt to the new reality. So, I called it out like earlier that reactive approach is really not like a sustainable approach anymore. See where you can kind of leverage smarter risk strategies, AI-driven solutions, dispute management. I gave some insights earlier on how you can, track car testing, for example. But apart from that, you can also, from your end or a solution provider together, like how we do, for example, tracking fraud nowadays is something that you also can implement for your side. Like to have some real-time monitoring in place to catch fraud before it escalates. For example, like have an anomaly detection in place that gives instant red flags on your unusual spikes in segment. Let's just say that you sell like high value digital gift cards, right? And it suddenly goes up 10x in the last hour. Were you expecting this or is something off? Um, Not only leverage advanced chargeback prevention tools, but also track your non-fraud disputes very closely. Like, are your INR, your item not received chargeback, suddenly going up? If that's true, then you will have then an opportunity to refine logistics or adjust your delivery schedules or change even fulfillment partners again. Or are your significantly not as described chargebacks are going up? So do you need to change your website product display? Do you need to set clearer refund and return policies? My suggestion is like allowing you to track and segment all of these different um, things might allow you to pinpoint on problems that you can solve internally. Smarter fraud segmentation, having dynamic risk controls that adapt tactics. I do want to touch base on very quickly on a pre-auth integration because I think it's an important call out here in terms of like how a pre-auth integration can help. So since VAMP now monitors settled transactions rather than sales, merchants can consider if a pre-auth fraud screening can be implemented. And why do I say that? I think for pre-auth, you can identify and block suspicious activity before the transaction is reaching the authorization stage. And with that, merchants can really significantly reduce unauthorized purchase attempts, right? So with VAMP monitoring fraud at stricter thresholds, I mentioned it before, like one fraud attack could be enough to push a merchant into violation, and a pre-auth check can really be a game changer in allowing you to block those high-risk transactions before they reach the authorization stage.
Got it. I think that's a really important one. And so just to make sure I'm clear, pre-auth means that if I'm a merchant, I would leverage a fraud solution before I actually send that request over to the issuer. So before it goes out for authorization. The flip side of that is that I am, if I'm post auth, that I'm sending actually that authorization request. It's going to the issuer through the network to the issuer. And when it comes back, only those accepted are put through that fraud screen.
Yeah.
Got it. So pre-auth can help. Um, all right. So we know, I think some of the trends I've seen and just talking to you and other folks on the RNRI team and the fraud team at WorldPay is it just seems like an increased level of sophistication for these fraud rings. It's no longer the guy kind of stealing your card and running out and buying some gift cards, right? But actually very sophisticated fraud rings. And we're seeing that pop up and the bad guys are getting a hold of ML and AI. So how can AI and ML be used on the good side, right? So how can merchants leverage ML and AI to really combat fraud and then also help keep their ratios down? Shavi, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, so maybe I can just very quickly, because you touched base on it, already, Nicole. Like for me, I'm in the fraud space for a little bit over a decade now. I can give you a very quick high-level journey through the fraud landscape. Like, so when I started my career in fraud prevention, like fraud was in a lot of cases a manual effort. A fraudster would steal a would steal a credit card, enter it on a website, and hoped it worked. Refund fraud was as simply as just claiming an item not received. Fake identities were small, they were basic. So over time, fraud rings have really changed, and um, as they expanded, but you might ask, like, what changed? Like, first of all, automation. Because automation, fraud became scalable. Fraud rings, they expanded globally. We have bots. They can now test thousands of stolen cards in just a minute. They can leverage scripts for your credential stuffing attacks. And instead of stealing from one merchant at a time, they're now running well-coordinated, large-scale operations. This is something that keeps us busy every day from our side. But with that said, like even fraudsters, they have something more powerful right now, which is AI. And in combination with deepfake technology, we're really seeing fraud reach a whole new level. We're seeing fake identities being created that look just like real ones, fake documents that bypass KYC checks, even fake voices that trick customer service teams. We see also like fraud as a service popping up, which is pretty new. And it's a new earning model, which is making cybercrime as easy as online shopping. I have one, example of fraud story to share with you is that, and showing kind of how fraudsters are going above and beyond nowadays. So we recently experienced a fraud attack on an electronics retailer. These fraudsters, they knew that like if they would ship transactions to a single delivery address or a handful of delivery addresses, they knew that they would get tricked into static distance rules or velocity checks. So what they did is very clever. They got all of these transactions shipped to hotels. And not any random hotels. No, they actually picked hotels that were in close proximity of the stolen card. For example, a credit card stolen from California with a Californian billing address and a Californian zip code. Those transactions would then go to the Hilton Homewood Suites in California, which was pretty smart. And then after all of these, so at that point, they went online, placed all of these transactions, and when they then got notifications that these transactions were being shipped and received, they then started calling all of the hotels one by one. And they made a beautiful story like, hey, hotel, I recently stayed at your place. I had to check out earlier due to a family emergency situation, unfortunately. And since I had to check out earlier, I made an order, but it didn't get delivered our time. Can you do me a favor and forward me that package? And while they were on the phone with the hotel clerks, they emailed them a new shipping label, asking them to attach it to the package. So long story short, we tracked all of this and found that all of the packages were then forwarded to a single reshipper address. And once these packages were then received there, they quickly set up storefronts on marketplaces to resell stolen merchandise. And since this was a reshipper address, they could coordinate very quickly. So we tracked all of that from end to end and found that this fraud ring made over 7 million in fraudulent attempts, which is one of the biggest one that I've seen so far. So this is just like one of a recent fraud ring story that I wanted to share with you all to showcase how fraudsters are going above and beyond. Yeah.
And yeah, they're getting incredibly sophisticated. $7 million is a pretty big heist. How is machine learning or AI, how can it be used to catch something like that, right? Because it there's a time lag, right? If you're asking like rules or humans to catch something like that, how can ML help speed up the capture there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think like the power of Signifyd, for example, like how we do it, like we have like a layered defense approach. So we combine machine learning, automation, human intelligence, and let those work together. Like first of all, to answer your question, machine learning is your first layer of defense. It's your frontline defense kicking in when fraud attack is scaling in real time. Because like as fraud attacks at scale, you need to have something that in real time says like yes, no, this is good or legit. So you have your machine learning as your first line of defense. And for example, your human expertise is super helpful. Like that example that I just shared, to be able to kind of like understand the whys, the whats, the context. Like for example, like we called victims, we called hotels to kind of really figure out like what's the story, like what is it end to end. And once we figured that out, we were then able to build features and move that into our machine learning, help to make our machine learning smarter. So that dynamic feedback loop is sorry, is for me a game changer. And that helps us to kind of like continuously optimize machine learning as fraud continues to become more sophisticated and scale. So it's super also it's also super important to perform that data storytelling and feed that back into machine learning.
Yeah, no, it's a great, scary, but great story. And I think just that fast anomaly detection, right? Because the longer you keep that hole open, it's almost like the faster the fraudsters like find
Yeah.
it, and try to fill it. So I guess the flip side of that is we've been talking about, thresholds. Kim gave some great examples of on the non-fraud side, right? What merchants need to do. I mean, the other side of this that we haven't talked about is, well, I know how to get rid of all your fraud, right? And you can really tighten your threshold and make sure that you're declining more transactions. So, but that creates a terrible customer experience, right? And that's not what we're all here for, and that's not what is going to keep these merchants in business. So, Kim, talk to us about the flip side, right? And as we're navigating VAMP, these tighter thresholds, what can we do to protect customer experiences, or what do we got to think about from an approval rate standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. The big thing here, I think all merchants want to reduce fraud and ensure they're not running the program, but you also don't want to create customer friction. And so I think with the right fraud tools, you can ensure that you have a happy balance between the two. Do things like make sure that the fraud detection tool utilizes doesn't necessarily require manual reviews so that you can have that fast and smooth checkout experience for your customers. Biometrics are key, right? You can utilize as a consumer or a merchant, you can utilize verification tools that ensure you're identifying your customer without asking for a lot of additional criteria at checkout, right? I'm a big fan of, you know, Apple Pay because I can use my face to check out and I don't have to do anything else. And I love that. So implementing those types of tools, I think will really help with a smooth checkout process. Sure, you have the right customer without causing any friction with the customer. And then identifying legitimate fraudulent transactions and then reducing those false positives. We mentioned those a couple times, right? We want to allow the legitimate customers coming through and continuing with the purchase while blocking the fraudsters. So start thinking about things like, do you have a high number of false positives? What can you do to rein that in without, allowing those good transactions to come through? So I'm not going to pretend to be a fraud expert, right? That's why Javi and Nicole are here. But these are some things that come to my mind to ensure that you're doing some right things up front to allow the transaction to happen for the right consumers and blocking the bad ones. And I'll let Javi kind of address a little bit more from a fraud perspective.
Yeah, that's a good point because like fraud prevention is often being seen as like just a way to stop bad actors. But the
Yeah.
reality is that the right fraud prevention strategy can significantly improve, the overall customer experience. It's not only about just blocking fraud, but making sure that your legitimate customers aren't getting caught in the crossfire. Apart from the customer experience point of view, if you also just simply look at the math, an increased number of approved legitimate transactions helps balance that equation. So it's super good and important to make sure that you have like how to say it, like your pool of good transactions needs to be as high as possible. Since VAMP is calculating the total disputes divided by your settled transactions, the higher transactions settled volume naturally reduces your dispute ratio, making it easier to stay in compliance with the thresholds. And AI-driven fraud prevention tools can absolutely help to streamline approvals for trusted customers, reducing friction at checkout, adapt in real time, and confidently approve good transactions while keeping bad folks out.
Yeah, I think that's a great point for both of you guys on customer experience and also just the keep your denominator high, right? Your healthy denominator with good transactions. So as a merchant, I'm going to rely a lot on partners, I would think, right? I've got acquiring partners, I've got either an in-house or fraud solution partners. What should they be asking acquirers? We talked a little bit earlier that acquirers can maybe help you calculate your thresholds. They will definitely be the ones coming to you if you do make it on the naughty list. But what else can they expect of their acquirers, or how should they be partnering with their acquirers?
Yeah, I think acquirers here, they need to do a really good job in creating their own early warning system. So work with your acquirers to understand, what does that look like? How do I get a notified before I hit that 150 bips? Or even acquire, how are you going to handle it if you're above 50 bips and I'm above 30? How do we work to ensure that these ratios stay below so we all can avoid fines? And I think your acquirers are going to come up with answers to this, right? They're learning about this too. We're all learning together, but I think come April 1st, as we start digging into the ratios, acquirers will have a much better plan, and it's just understanding and making sure your acquirer is sharing that plan with you. Also, WorldPay has created some best-in-class partnerships, with companies like Signifyd and Ravlin and other providers. We know that these pieces are important. We need to be able to block fraud while still allowing you to create revenue as a merchant. So look at some of those providers within your acquirer, right? What do they have that's maybe an easy turnkey or a solution that you can utilize to make sure you're going down the right path here? And then look at your dispute tools, right? WorldPay has a pretty robust dispute tool out there that you can look at and understand your chargeback volume, your life cycle, understanding what reason codes you're receiving today to understand what you need to do further. So just utilize the tools that your acquirer might have in place and understand for them how they are going to tackle VAMP on your behalf. From a WorldPay perspective, a little shameless plug, we will be doing a webinar on April 8th for our merchants as well to help them understand what we're going to do on their behalf in this program.
That's great. And Shavi, for those working with Signifyd, we can help them get their thresholds and navigate this, and it's our job, right? I mean that's on us, right?
That's on us.
The good part of Signifyd is you're going to
Yeah.
pass the buck and we own it,
Yeah.
and we will keep you below that threshold. If they're not with Signifyd, what should they be talking to their fraud providers about or their internal fraud teams about?
Sorry, Kim, did you want to add something here?
No, sorry.
Yeah, no, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, Shavi, what should they, if you're a merchant, what do you think they should be? I guess one is maybe asking them for their thresholds, asking them maybe what changes they're making and coming up ready for VAMP. Anything else they should be expecting from a fraud partner?
From a fraud partner, I would say see if you can get some clarity on I think the first question is how are you doing now with loss rates? I mean, we talked about it earlier. It was a question that came up. It's good to kind of get some perspective on the current loss rates, your approval rates, and see what kind of how you can strike that balance. Try to kind of get more clarity on your current metrics. How far are you off from the monitoring programs? You now know after this webinar what the right thresholds are. So see how far you are off with those thresholds. So I think that's the first one try to get clarity on your current ratio. See where you stand. And the second piece I also shared that earlier. See if you can get that breakdown between if you know your loss rates. See if you can get that breakdown between how does it look like between fraud versus non-fraud chargebacks, because those will drive also different action items. Your fraud chargebacks will be handled differently from a mitigation standpoint versus your non-fraud chargeback. So, see if you can have that additional clarity on that split. Are there some internal action items that you can use to optimize the customer dissatisfaction piece that might drive those non-fraud chargebacks up? So first, that would be my initial recommendation. Get clarity on those current ratios that you are on, and split that down between fraud and non-fraud.
Yeah, no, great. Guys, this time has flown by. I can't believe we have just 5 minutes left. Let's just hit back on some of the key points that we've made, and then I'll give each of you time to respond with what your key takeaways would be. But part of what I've heard from you guys is a bit of a checklist, right? So if I'm not already, make sure I have a proactive risk management and comprehensive risk management solution that's in place. I need to know my ratios, fraud and non-fraud. They're coming together, so I've got to be able to look at both of them. My strategies are likely going to vary for non-fraud versus fraud, but I've got to holistically get a handle on what my ratios are. Make sure that I'm improving customer communication. We talked a lot about that up front with our stories. I'm sure everyone here has some kind of a story. And Kim, you said it well, that our expectation, it's not just, our expectations have changed, right? There are merchants out there really pushing the boundaries. And part of what allows Amazon to push the boundaries is the amount of data that they're collecting, the ML, the tools that they're using. They've found that those great refund experiences, those great return experiences cause repurchase. And so, we want to help all merchants out there be able to offer those similar type experiences. And part of that starts with having arms around data and using these tools. Upgrade to advanced fraud prevention solutions. Shavi even mentioned pre-auth. I'm a big fan of pre-auth. It not only helps you mitigate your fraud and your thresholds, but it's actually your best chance of increasing auth rates. We've seen that time and time again. Refine chargeback processes. Kim mentioned some different chargeback processes and also some tooling, right? That there's some great tooling out there as well to help on chargeback management and resolution processes. And then continuously monitor and adjust. This isn't like a go get everything ready, put your tools in place, and then like job is done, move on. There's definitely going to be an ongoing impact and monitoring that needs to happen. All right, so just some last words of advice, key takeaways. Kim, I'll let you start.
Yeah, sure. I think I'll just kind of summarize. This is a great checklist here. But we all know fraud and disputes, they're not going anywhere, right? So just ensuring how and how you manage those is evolving. VAMP has proved that, right? We're going to have to evolve a little bit and shift here. Just prepare now, leverage the right tools, just so you can stay ahead of the curve and just keep your payments flowing smoothly, right? VAMP doesn't have to be overwhelming, doesn't have to be complex. Take a step back, look at the data that you have in place and see what steps you need to take to move forward and work closely with your providers and your acquirers to do so.
Great, thank you. Shavi?
Yeah, from my side, like just a quick summary on what I shared earlier. Believe me when I say that fraud is evolving at scale. It's getting more sophisticated by the day. Your traditional fraud prevention alone is no longer enough. Use smarter risk strategies. It's super essential. Solutions like pre-auth can help to also send cleaner traffic to banks, making sure that the relationship is also being optimized. Improve approval rates, reducing unnecessary disputes. AI machine learning really helps to drive fraud detection up and your dispute management and make sure that you can proactively address all of these emerging threats without unnecessary blocking legitimate customer to make sure that those folks are having continuously a smooth experience. Ultimately, VAMP compliance isn't just about stopping fraud. It's about striking the right balance, approving more good orders while keeping fraudsters out.
Really well said. Thank you guys so much. A couple of folks have asked in the questions if there's some takeaways and collateral. Like I said, we'll be emailing out a recording. We'll also send out some material with just more reading, more information about VAMP. But let's keep the conversation going. Thanks everyone for joining. Special thanks to Kimberly and Shavi for joining us. Take care. Have a good day.
Thank you all.